Today, though, I do want to introduce our presenter who, if you were following before, has a great history that it connects with my father, so that's pretty cool. I'll have to ask my dad if he remembers you, but probably a grade apart, one year difference in schooling, but same school for elementary school. Henry Sapoznik is an award-winning producer, musicologist, and performer, and he's also a writer in the fields of traditional and popular Yiddish and American music and culture. He is a native Yiddish speaker, child of a Holocaust survivor, and one of the things, there's a lot that I can talk about. He has a nice bio on his website, which I'm going to put into the chat so people can read more about it. It's henrysapoznik.com. But what I want to share about is he is also a 5-time Grammy-nominated producer and performer. He's been in over 50 records, including reissued over 30 anthologies of Yiddish, jazz, old-time, cantorial, ragtime, blues, Italian, swing, blackface, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly, but minstrelsy?
That's exactly right.
And bluegrass recordings. And he's also won the 2002 Peabody Award for co-producing the 10-part NPR series that was titled The Yiddish Radio Project. So today, as you know, the title is African American Cantors. This is something that I am going to thank Betty and Stan Nitsky for connecting us. But I also want to make sure that everyone knows that in about a year and a half ago, someone shared an article that I read, but never really connected the dots. There's an article that you can read more about this that was in the Times of Israel, I think Henry said, that was shared with me in November 2020. But that was before we even thought about bringing Henry on. So thank you, Stan and Betty, who watched a couple presentations from Henry through their congregation in Woodstock. So thank you. And I'm going to spotlight Henry. You can add or take away anything that I mentioned if it was incorrect or correct and you think there's something else that people should know about you. But I do like, Henry is a banjo player, but he calls it the banjo. So you got to know the instrument well. But thank you very much. I'm looking forward to this as well. So thank you for joining us today.
Thanks so much for asking me. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I want to thank the Nitskys for sitting through this again. So thank you for that. So we only have a half hour, so let's get started because there's so much wonderful stuff.
And I'm going to jump in for a sec, just so everyone knows. Henry will take questions afterwards. The half hour, we're going to try to go straight through his presentation and then follow that up with some questions and answers. He said he's got no time limit on.
Thank you. Thanks so much. So while the history of Black Jewish cultural interaction always focuses on how Jews adopted and adapted Black music, ragtime, jazz, swing, R&B, blues, as performers, promoters, managers, record labels, what has never been before explored were the Blacks who performed Yiddish and cantorial music in the Jewish community in theaters, on record and on radio between the two world wars. And this was due to a couple of movements. The first was in the first decades of the 20th century, saw the rise of African-American synagogues, the Black Hebrew movement of Southern Blacks who moved up to New York, moved up to the Northeast to escape Jim Crow laws. And they moved to communities like Harlem and Newark, New Jersey. Here are pictures we see these communities around the time of the turn of the 20th century. This interaction between Jews and Blacks at this critical moment really showed how the emerging Jewish community, with the rise of Zionism, with the Yiddish theater, was a model for a lot of the Blacks in the forthcoming, what was called the Harlem Renaissance. The Black Hebrew congregations were unaffiliated and unaccepted by the Jewish religious establishment. The congregations were, for the most part, small and poor, meeting in a storefront or a house, what a similarly sized Orthodox congregation would call a shtibel, a little house. Here we see some of the congregations on the left the Moorish Zionist temple, where we see Rabbi Mordechai Herman in the center with the tallis and with his arm up, and who claimed direct Ethiopian lineage. He was a member, as we will see, a lot of other Black congregations were members of the Marcus Garvey Back to Africa movement. In the center, we see the Commandment Keepers Ethiopian Hebrew congregation, founded in 1919 by Rabbi Wentworth Arthur Matthew. He's in the center of this picture. And he established a series of synagogues in the US and the Caribbean based on traditional Ashkenazic Orthodox ritual, together with ritual relevant in the African community. And what's interesting is that the congregations that he founded and some of them are still active. For example, in Chicago, the Beth Shalom B'nai Ethiopian Hebrew congregation, which is headed by Rabbi Capers Funya, who is a first cousin of Michelle Obama. And on the right is the congregation B'nai Abraham, founded by another Caribbean, Barbados-born Rabbi Arnold Josiah Ford, pictured holding the string bass. Ford, who founded his synagogue in 1929, is an outgrowth of his work with Marcus Garvey, was also a member of the Clef Club, an activist Black music union. Among the other members of the Clef Club were Willie the Lion Smith, the Harlem Stride pianist, here pictured at his home. And Smith claimed throughout his life Jewish connectivity. In fact, we see here his business card on the right, which lists him in English as the Hebrew cantor, and in Yiddish, it says the Yiddish Chazan. So Willie the Lion Smith could perform in Yiddish and did perform in Yiddish, and supposedly had training as a Chazan, and claimed to have conducted services in Harlem Black Hebrew congregations. One way that we really kind of see this sort of interesting mix of cultures is in the prayer book issued by Arnold Ford, and the combination of the prayers. For example, on the top is something taken from the English High Church. On the bottom, we see Adon Olam, the Sulzer version of Adon Olam, which is sung in 90% of Ashkenazic synagogues. And finally, something taken from the Black Baptist Church of the South. It was a very lively, dynamic mix of different influences that came out in the development of these Black Hebrew congregations. The Yiddish press was crazy about these movements, and they really placed a lot of emphasis on the uniqueness and the kind of novelty of Black Hebrews. On the left is an article from the Yiddische Bilder, the magazine Jewish Pictures, which has an article called Die Yidden von Harlem on the left. And on the right is one of several articles I found, which documented young African-American boys who trained to be for bar mitzvah in order to be able to come what was called the Schwarze Chazen. And here's this clipping from 1928 from Newark, New Jersey. So the dynamic of Blacks studying Ashkenazic culture and religion was not a sometime thing. It happened very actively. Now, the fact that we even know anything about the Schwarze Chazanim was due to one Yiddish journalist named Shimon Rubinson of the Yiddish paper, the Yiddische Tagblatt, the Jewish daily news, who would over a period of time in 1920 and 21, have articles in his column, Gross New York, Big New York, about Black Jews in New York. And his favorite subject was the Shvatza Chazanim, and he coined the phrase, and this was how they were described. So, for example, on the left, we see a picture of Mendel Del Shvalzar, and he appears in Rubensen's June 28, 1920 column, where Rubensen writes that he came to work one day and found this young Black man waiting to speak to him, as he was a press agent for Kessler's Theater, a Yiddish theater on the Lower East Side, and wanted press in Rubensen's column for the new production at Kessler's Theater. Rubensen said, "So what is this act?" And he says, "It's me, and I sing Yiddish and chazonis." And Rubensen had never heard of anything like this. He says, "Well, look, what do you do? Show me what you do." And Mendel, who he called himself Mendel Del Shvalzar, launched into the industrial strength Yiddish showstopper, a Chazandal of Shabbos, a demanding pyrotechnical mix of ornate cantorial melismas and snappy barn-burning theatricality. He sings with a real Yiddish turn, Rubensen wrote, with a real Yiddish moan and sigh. The old-time Jewish trope is there, and really Jewish. Make no mistake, he assures his readers, until now, we've only had a Jewish Black, Al Jolson, a cantor son who makes believe he is Black, but who is a Jew who is not Black. But here is a Black man who is a cantor and who calls himself Mendel Del Shvalzar. Other of the Shvatza Chazonim on the upper right that turn up in Rubensen's column was David Kalistrata Hakoyen del Falash, who claimed to be literate in 32 languages and eventually came to the United States. Last we hear of him, he was Rabbi David de Kolskrita, the dean of the Pittsburgh Afro-American Language School of the Universal Ancient Ethiopian Spiritual Church of Christ, and whose congregation that he led in Hebrew prayer. On the lower left, we see Abraham Ben Franklin, a traveling orator and chazan who toured the Northeast, giving lectures to Jewish communities. And on the right, Rabbi Wentworth Arthur Matthew again, as we had previously seen him. But the two Shvarza Chazonim, about who we know the most and who the story really shows the dynamic between the Black and Jewish congregations, we'll start with the first, Thomas LaRue Jones, 1894 to 1954. Jones is born in Newark, New Jersey in 1894. And according to census records, the Jones family lived in and among the Jews in Newark's thriving minority neighborhoods. This map from 1911 and the census materials show that the Jones family lived in direct proximity to Newark's thriving, dynamic Yiddish community, which is probably where Jones learned his Yiddish. He had several brothers, none of whom were in Jewish entertainment. On the left was his older brother, Demosthenes Demos Jones, who was a dancer and singer on the Black vaudeville circuit. And on the right is his brother, Herbert Socrates Jones, who was a songwriter for Tin Pan Alley. We first hear about Jones in 1916 when the Yiddish newspaper, The Forward, took him on a series of salons in and around New York. He then went on a series of tours of the backwoods of the United States, playing Jewish communities in the upper Midwest, in the Midwest, and in New England. Here he starts by 1920 is already, Thomas LaRue Jones is already being billed here as the Shvalzar Goyish Chazan, but he would eventually be best known as the Shvalzar Chazan. He returns to New York in 1922 and begins to appear in a series of big productions on the Yiddish theater. So, for example, here in 1922 is a poster on the left from the play, the Schuppekleid, the wedding dress. And the theater, the Lenox Theater on Lenox Avenue on 111th Street in Harlem, was one of the newest Yiddish theaters built. And it was a pretty impressive idea of the owners of the theater to create a program that reached out both to the historic Jewish community and to the changing demographic Black community. And we see in this poster, half of the poster is taken up with advertising a großer Konzert, a big concert with, as he is billed, Der Shvalzar Chazan. And here is Thomas LaRue in the center with a men and boys choir from an Orthodox shul in Newark, New Jersey. This play was so incredibly popular, people came repeatedly to see it, that the producers launched another play the following year based on a very popular Yiddish feature in the foreword of a character named Yente Telebende. And Yente Telebende was one of the most popular presentations on the Yiddish stage. It's so popular that I even have a completely separate talk that I do about Yente Telebende. Here too, Thomas LaRue was incorporated into the center of the production. And in fact, it became so popular, people returned to see the play 2, 3, even 4 times, because at each show, Thomas LaRue would sing another set of Yiddish and Chazanist songs. So he was a big draw. And here we see the various places on all of the posters. He is billed as Der Shvalzar Chazan. And this was an incredible phenomenon. The play ran for the entire season and then continued on as a on various tours. Here too, LaRue was incredibly popular in the Yiddish press, in both not only the Yiddish press, but in the American mainstream press and even in the African American press. I have quite a number of articles where Black publications wrote about him. A radio pioneer, he was one of the first performers on the station WOR, which was a founding radio station, and he became a critical presence in the cultural life of American Jewry. So let's take a moment now and listen to the only recording that Thomas LaRue made. In fact, this is the single only recording of any of the Shvalzar Chazanim who were active in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. So what's really powerful about this piece, as we will hear, is that it supports a number of the articles written about the Shvalzar Chazanim and Thomas LaRue in particular, about his amazingly, powerfully rich, lush, accurate Hamish Yiddish and his Ivre, his Hebrew. This was so repeated over and over again in the press. When I started my research on this almost 40 years ago, there was no recording. The recording only turned up about a year ago. So I had been doing most of this research without hearing this. So we're going to take a listen to this one record that Thomas LaRue made in June of 1923. And this was kind of a typical LaRue performance. All of his stage shows had him going between Yiddish songs and chazanis. So the first side that we will listen to is this Yiddish song called Yiddele, Verlil nit dein Hoffnung. Rabidele, Jews don't give up hope. And it's, as we'll hear, it's a tremendous nod to Jewish continuity. So Yiddele, Verlil nit dein Hoffnung from 1923.
der Jid wird kein Mul mit Wehren verloren, wie Sand bei dem Jahr wird sich mehren, in welcher Sach den Himmel die Sterne, in wo ist geworden, in dem Jid absehen. Der Goya der Scheune macht im Pogromen sein Blut halten fließen, pink wie in Stromen. Man verbittert sein Leben als Schreck. In der Rot bei ihm alles weg. Der Scheune der Hin, harget sein Kind, in hofft auf alles, pink wie in Mitzrayim. Die schon noch habo, wie Jerusalem. Verlier nur nicht dein Hoffnung, Rebit, es wird amul dir, euer Sauantit. Hara Oma Ina Mulek, hast gelernt mit sei Bulek. War ei dir schrecken, dass sie kein Mul nicht. Arunter ist Sarnikalai, bin Feulan, wisst sie euer sein frei. Verlier nur nicht dein Hoffnung, Rebit. Verlier nur nicht dein Hoffnung, Rebit. Es wird amul dir, euer Sauantit. Hara Oma Ina Mulek, hast gelernt mit sei Bulek. War ei dir schrecken, dass sie kein Mul nicht. Vielen Wetten sich bekovet, in dem Land in Morgen dovet. Verlier nur nicht dein Hoffnung, Rebit, Rebit.
For his first recording, Thomas LaRue could have very easily picked a very popular Yiddish theater song of the period, some snappy comedy song or maybe a love song, but instead he picks the most unapologetic listing of historic tormentors of the Jews, and the blunt invocation of Jewish blood bought cheap is simultaneously a throwback to the beginning of the Yiddish theater with its from the street content. This is a powerful song written by Sholem Sekunda, who would then go on in future years to write by Mirbis Duchesne. What is so interesting about this piece is how it really is a call to Jews to retain the historic connection that they have with God, a very powerful moment, and something which, as a Black man, he could say on records in Yiddish that he could not have said as a Black man on record in English. This was not popular at this time. So it's an incredible statement about his identity, both as a Black man and speaking to the Jewish community. For the second side, again, LaRue could have chosen one of the great showstoppers of Jewish cantorial recording of Kol Nidre. Everyone recorded Kol Nidre. He could have even recorded Eli Eli, for which he was very famous. However, he did not. He chose a very quotidian, a very plain, everyday prayer that is said during the week before you open the Aron Kodesh to take out the Torah. This is one of the most common and one of the most popular, but he turned it into an incredible statement. In fact, he is the first chazan to have recorded Mizratze Berachmim. The great Yossele Rosenblatt would only record his version a few years afterwards because of the influence of hearing the Thomas LaRue recording. So let's take a listen to Mizratze Berachimim. And one thing to take a listen to here is his control. About a minute or so into the piece, he's singing with head tones. It's a very kind of a thin, a smaller sound. But when he comes to the important critical words of Avinu Malkeinu, he shifts into chest tones. And suddenly the piece emerges fully formed, dramatic, and powerfully visceral. It's a great moment. In 1930, Thomas LaRue went on the first of 5 European and Middle East tours. Here, a map from 1930, his first tour, which, as we see, takes him from the cities of Warsaw, Białystok, Lodz, Petrov, Berlin, and Dresden. This was an incredible experience for the Jews of Eastern Europe. For as odd as this might have been in New York, at least American Jews were used to seeing African Americans on a daily basis. The Yiddish press in Europe was totally astounded and couldn't possibly. So it ranged from, for example, the headline at the top: Schwarzer Chasen von Amerika macht dann a Tumult zwischen polnische Jiden. The Black Cantor from America creates problems among the Polish Jews. That was a good review. As opposed to on the bottom, his concert in Warsaw, the home of the Feinschmeckers, of the self-important Jewish audiences who loved Chazonis. It's where the great Plomatsky Synagogue and the great cantor Gershon Sirota. The Warsaw Jews were not so impressed. Here the headline reads, Der Schwarze Chasen, with quotation marks around it. Der Schwarze Chasen hat Nächten gehabt in Warschau, a schwarzer Sof. The Black Cantor in Warsaw last night had a dark ending. So this concert didn't go as well, but he was able to tour for several years, only quitting in the years right before the outbreak of World War II. After the war, his concerts decreased. This is on the left, a concert of his at the Orthodox shul in Newark, Ahavas Sion, which is today a Chabad shul, and only recently located his final resting place, which when I did locate it, found to my heartbreak that was an unmarked grave, and have been raising money to put a headstone up for Thomas LaRue. But as difficult as it was for a Black man to be a Schwarzer Chasen, to be someone who interacts in a dynamic with the Jewish community, the only thing that could have possibly been any more difficult was if he was a woman. And so to that end, we meet Gladys May Sellers, who billed herself as Goldie de Schwarze Chazente. We first really learn about her in her growing up, being born in Milwaukee, born into a middle-class Black family in the Black Baptist Church. Almost from her childhood years on, she was a noted singer in the church, and was well regarded as a carrier of Black uplift and culture in the church and in performances. She then appeared with a Black jazz band in Chicago in the early 1920s, one of the pioneering Black jazz ensembles in coming out of Chicago in the early 20s. But it's 1924 that she suddenly emerges fully formed as Goldie de Schwarze Chazente, and with a completely made up, an incredibly dynamic biography, a creation myth. Here in the upper left is a kind of a synopsis. She was born in Abyssinia and was sent to study singing in Milan by a tribal chief from Africa. She was part of the Sheba of Gaza, a Negro congregation. Well, of course, none of this was true, and it wouldn't have made a difference unless her performances were not great. And clearly, the fact that she stayed on this Jewish circuit for years showed just how powerful her abilities were. In fact, it was so popular that she wrote a play about herself called The Daughter of a Lost Tribe. It's there on the left. And this play was to show her upbringing, and clearly was a popular offering. Amazingly, she shows up in New York in 1926 in a salacious Broadway show called Lulu Bell, put on by David Belasco, the great impresario. This was such a salacious show. It was so ribald and so incredibly controversial that it ran for 16 months. And it was an incredibly popular show. Once it closed, she returned to the Yiddish vaudeville circuit. Here's a terrific ad that shows her on the stage with some of the greatest Yiddish performers of the 1920s. Hirsch Gross and his Beubrige Kapelle, Cantor Shmuel Wolf, Seymour Rechtzeit. These were some of the top Yiddish performers. Again, sadly, we have no recordings of her, but with her placement in these shows really shows that her ability as Thomas LaRue to internalize both the Yiddish songs and chazanas must have been absolutely spot on. We next hear about her in another Broadway show in 1928. This one did not do so well, by the poet E.E. Cummings. It's a play called Hymn. It got terrible reviews and only ran for 12 performances, but she got great reviews. As it says on the top, Goldie Steiner sang the Frankie and Johnny legend with excellent effect. They're one of the great vernacular Black songs, Frankie and Johnny. And here is an etching done by one of the founders of the Ashcan School of Painting, John Sloan, who attended one of the 24 performances, and gives us a great idea of her abilities going back and forth between the Jewish stage and the mainstream stage. In 1933, newspapers around the country started running a piece about a church in Chinatown headed by a former criminal who Thomas Noonan, who had become a evangelist and started his church called the Cathedral of the Underworld in a former Chinatown opium den. Here's part of the article that it talks about. It says, behind Tom Noonan on the stage, the crowd saw a jazz orchestra, a volunteer choir, a portly negress, a Japanese, a Jew, 3 cornet players, and a song leader. It went on. The negress turned out to be Goldie Mae Steiner, student of Hebrew and the only colored woman cantor in America. She sang the great Jewish lament, Eli Eli, then sat down and joined lustily in singing Onward, Christian Soldiers. Her staying with Thomas Noonan, she was on radio every week for the next few years, and her singing was so good that there are listings of this Christian evangelical show in the pages of New York Yiddish newspapers, because her singing was so Hamish and so authentic that the Yiddish newspapers actually gave them presence. Her final appearances are perhaps the most amazing and the most interesting, and really shows what a powerful presence she must have been. First, on the left, from 1938, is an announcement for a fundraiser for the social activist agency, the Urban League, the Black civil rights organization. So here is a concert at Brooklyn's wonderful Academy of Music. And who is she on the stage with? Here she's on the stage with Duke Ellington, with Fats Waller, with Bubbles and Buck. And here, though she is billed in the program as Millie Goldie Steiner, a new name for her, and billed as Millie Goldie Steiner, the only negress cantor in the world. So here, in a performance for the African-American community, she identifies herself as a Black cantor, a representative of Jewish literacy and Jewish music. Jump to 1939. The next year, in a musical by the great Yiddish composer, Alexander Olshanetsky, who wrote Mein Städtele Bells. She is in a performance with the great Yitzchak Feld, one of the great Yiddish comedy stars. And here, again, she gets great press. The cast is also aided by the presence of Miss Gladys May Sellers, a colored entertainer of generous proportions who adds some novel, if startling, touches to the proceedings. Gladys May Steiner is her Black birth name. She is not billed as Goldie de Schwarze Chazende. She uses her Black birth name in a Yiddish show for the Yiddish world. And then finally, the following year, Der Polnische Rebbe, that play that she was just in, was so popular that a new play was constructed here called the Rebbetzins Gigolo, the rabbi's wife's lover. Yiddish theater, you gotta love it. And here she's billed as Goldie de Schwarze Chazente. So she is able to move through both Black culture and the Jewish world. It's an incredible feature of her amazing career. Sadly, she disappears without a trace within the next couple of years, and no knowledge of where she is, what she did after this time is known to us. The reason that this amazing moment died out was a couple of reasons. First of all, after World War II, the popularity of Yiddish as a dynamic standalone culture was in decline with the destruction of East European Jewry, and also the rise of modern Hebrew as a language. Also, the change in the kind of chazanis that people were interested in, the old style chazanis of Yossele Rosenblatt and Gershon Sirota, was on its way out, and now congregational singing was becoming popular among the American Jews. And finally, the change in the political and socioeconomic interaction between Blacks and Jews after World War II, the rise of the civil rights movement, the kind of performances, these kind of hearty and very honest Black performers incorporating a rich, lush, authentic Hamisha Yiddish was no longer of interest in the Black or in the Jewish community, and gave a quiet ending to what had been an incredible moment of the Schwarze Chazonim. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to read some of the questions that already came up in the chat. And then if anyone has questions, please feel free to unmute your mic and ask as well. So one of the questions was, do any of these congregations still exist?
As mentioned, there is in Chicago, there's an active Black Hebrew congregation, quite successful. And there are offshoots. The Black Hebrew movement, which has an interesting, colorful, and unusual history. So yes, there is some continuity from the founding in the early 1920s, and there are also subsequent Black Hebrew congregations. However, none of them make use of this kind of deeply informed Ashkenazic Eastern European feel in the singing or in the kind of services that they offer. So this was representative of this moment.
Thank you. And then where did they receive their training?
The old-fashioned way of receiving training was being what was called a meshoicha. A meshoicha was an apprentice cantor, someone who as a child, for example, myself, my late father, Oliver Sholem, was the last of the Ravna Chazanim, came after World War II. And I started singing in choirs to accompany him. This was standard. Everyone, all kids did this, but the Black cantors did not have this opportunity. So in a number of the newspaper articles, there's a discrepancy. In some of the articles is this kind of popular myth that Thomas LaRue would sneak into the local shul and sit in the back and like take in all of the singing. So of course, one day, and the chazan at the bima gets sick, and it's, well, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And suddenly the little boy from the back of the shul comes up to the bima and starts leading the davening. And well, this is an amazing story. And the fact that it was repeated several times, of course, doesn't make it true. Actually, Thomas LaRue in several articles, in several interviews, said what is clearly obvious to those of us who listen to scratchy old records. He learned to sing from copying the great chazonim. And in fact, if you listen to the chazonis, he sounds he steals Yossele Rosenblatt's Dreidlach. He steals these really powerful soloistic sounds. And in fact, so much so that, as I said, Rosenblatt came to LaRue concerts. So records, P.S., there was nothing wrong with people learning to sing off records. A lot of chazonim were busy stealing from each other off records. And in fact, probably the greatest chazan of all, Gershon Sirota, who was at the Tlomatsky Shul in Warsaw, he got his first job at the Tlomatsky Shul in 1903 because of a 78 that he had just made. And he auditioned by record. Now that's history. Learning off records was a very acceptable way. And clearly his Yiddish and his Ivgar are so good. I mean, you can't tell that this guy is not. In fact, funny thing, I did a Henry Higgins from My Fair Lady. I gave this recording to some of my Yiddish etymology linguistic professors. And I said, tell me something about this guy. Who is this guy? You know, I'm just making believe that I didn't know. They said, oh, of course, this guy is from Warsaw. He clearly came from a Chazonist family. I mean, they made up this whole Hatzaplot story when in fact, here was this black guy who learned off records.
Interesting. Someone wrote in the comments, the Black Israelites is a very different group. Just making sure people know that. They're, I think, anti-Semitic to a degree now, or anti-Jewish.
Yeah, again, that's one of the offshoots. The Black Israelites are, and in fact, you know, the Nation of Islam started out as a Black Hebrews congregation, and only under Louis Farrakhan became a racist and anti-Semitic movement. So yeah, it's one of the great ironies how influential the Jewish community was in early Harlem and in early Newark on the emerging Black communities, and how much influence was offered. And then, of course, was this historic conflict between Jews and Blacks.
All right, thank you. And then Hebrew Israelites?
Yeah, Israelites in general, there's a couple of code words which kind of let you know that you know, they're not Jews. There's a very specific etymology that they choose in order to say. I mean, one of the great things in Rubenson's column, in one of his columns, he's talking to Reb Kaliskata, the Falash, and he says to him, because in his bio it says he married a woman in Pinsk and got Chazonet Smicha in Pinsk. And he said to him, what did your parents think of your wedding, of your marriage? He said, oh, it was a shanda. He used the word shanda. It was great. And he said, his parents said, whites are not real Jews. They're fakers. And it's such a great, you know, perspective that here is this carrier of this new kind of religion. And they say, oh, it's the white Jews who are the fakers. It's a really interesting, it really shows how the communities were in a kind of a conflict, inspiring each other, but also being competitors with each other.
All right, I see Stan and Betty. It looks like you have a question or a comment.
No, we think Henry's terrific.
I watched. What I found interesting was as he was chanting, you were chuckling.
Yeah, you could take the boy out of yeshiva.
The other question I had has nothing to do with the talk. That staircase in back of you looks fantastic.
Oh, my friend Harvey Varga made that. Yeah, open treads. It's a nice piece of construction.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you I'll tell him
You have a comment that says this should be a PBS show.
Alavai. I just, in fact, just today I heard back from my 6th book agent that I had sent a book proposal and was told that no one will publish a book on Black history written by a white person. even though this is a Jewish story. So I've had like plenty of, so no, I think this is an amazing story that is going to get heard this way, by individual communities. It's a great story. It's
You hook
really,
up with a black minister?
No, I think this is the perfect example of what is a crossover.
yes, it is a crossover. And it's really unusual. I mean, again, the big thing is not that Thomas LaRue was a great singer. There were tons of great black singers. That's not the issue. But his command of Yiddish and Hebrew is so stunning that it was really, you understand why he was doing this for over 20 years, that people, and not to say that there wasn't racism. There was plenty of racism that he encountered in the Jewish community. And the fact that I found him in an unmarked grave in not the Jewish section of the cemetery is a heartbreaking, I don't understand it. How can someone who is so involved?
How did you find the grave if it was unmarked?
Because, where do I have, let's see, oh, here. In this newspaper article, it gives the funeral home and it gives the, oh, you can't see it. You can't see it. Anyway, the
lot?
So I found the funeral home where he was buried, and they dug out the papers for me, and they got me in touch with the cemetery, who then went through their papers and located, because of the year and the time he was buried, they could by default figure out where he was buried. And it was like a potter's field. It was just an empty field.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was really amazing. But I'm still, it's a weird story that here is this guy who was involved. Like I found an article about him where it says that he is training orphan boys, their haftorah for their bar mitzvah. That's not what a performer does. That's what someone who is a member of the community does. And here he is ennobling the Jewish community, the Orthodox community in Newark, and yet there was no one at his funeral. It's an amazingly.
He was almost rejected. He was basically rejected.
I can't figure it out. I can't figure it out. And he was involved for, like I said, for decades. So it's a curious story about being a part of yes, Rob?
A question on that in the chat: was he ordained or did he convert? Meaning, do you have other details on that, or that you don't know?
I have found no evidence. There's anecdotal evidence that he davened in shul, but that's in a newspaper account. That's not telling me anything other than that's what the guy who wrote. There is no evidence that he ever became Jewish. And yet you listen to him. If you didn't know, if I just played this record and I said, oh, here's a recording from, Shimshon Agiba, I mean, you would say, oh, that's great. Shimshon, what a great singer. It's an amazing story about people who dedicated their lives to the Jewish community to uplift them and to give them hope and to give them culture and to give them a sense of being. And yet he disappears.
The only female cantor that I remember as a kid was Friedel Oisha, Moshe his sister, yeah. But my father always thought that, I hate to use the term, my father always thought he was a ham. Moshe was a ham. He liked Label Waldman.
You see, fist fights between fans of Chazonim were typical. Every street corner, you had fist fights about people who were, oh, what are you talking about? Moshe Kusevitsky can take David Kusevitsky with one arm tied behind his back.
The Twin Cantors. Do you remember the Twin Cantors who were not twins?
The Twin Cantors who had a catering hall in Brooklyn.
Yes, I know, because I was at a bar mitzvah celebration.
We couldn't afford the Twin Cantors. We only got one of them, sadly. No, that's not true. My father was a Chazan, but he wasn't a twin.
Well, they weren't twins either. They weren't twins.
They weren't, no.
They were
They
brothers.
were chazonim.
Yeah, but they were brothers.
Yeah.
Any other questions? I see everyone else is quiet. And Myra, you got to unmute. Herb or Rosalind, who's got the question?
I have a statement rather than a question.
I will allow statements.
There is a Black community,
Black Jewish.
Black Jewish synagogue in Philadelphia. And we had a meeting together where we both sang.
The choirs.
The choirs both sang at our synagogue. And the way they sang was essentially gospel Jewish.
Right. It wasn't the Hamish Yiddish.
It wasn't the Hamish Yiddish or anything like that. It was gospel
It was
Jewish.
rabble
And
rousing.
they were super good.
Yeah. And then that's the thing where I tried to show before that songster from that Black Hebrew congregation, that these were people. And P.S. Here's the interesting thing, that a number of the founders of these Black Hebrew congregations were from the Caribbean, and leads me to believe that the same way in the American South, where a lot of Black slaves took on the religions of their owners, the same could very well have been true in the Caribbean of Jewish slaveholders whose slaves also took on their religion. And then that's a whole parallel narrative about Jewish continuity. So the idea, as you said, the congregation that you saw in Philadelphia, their platform at this point is gospel as opposed to classic chazonis that we were just listening. In fact, most congregations, even Orthodox congregations, have gone away from classic chazonis. So it's not that unusual. In fact, there's now a tiny revival of congregations wanting to revive the great chazonis of Gershon Sirota and Vigoda and Rosenblatt. So that could have an effect.
Myra, you want to say something?
Well, I said stuff in my in the chat. You first of all, I didn't say this. You mentioned Michelle Obama in a congregation.
As a relative.
It's her cousin. It's not her. It's her cousin who was the rabbi at the synagogue in Chicago.
Okay. Aren't we all related anyhow?
Am I related to them? Oh boy, maybe I'll get an invite. Alavai. Yes, we are. But this is also, and then, but yes, that synagogue, someone here is from Chicago. Yes.
Yeah.
It's a very active. I've spoken to Rabbi Capers, wonderful man, literate, and he actually has smicha. He actually got real smicha in the Jewish community. He is ambidextrous. He is so. There's a lot of literacy in the establishment of that shul. That the fact that they don't do this old style kind of chazonas and they don't sing, they don't teach in Yiddish is secondary. You know what I mean? That was of a moment. That was of a moment.
Okay. The other thing I said several things, but was not Delilah from Samson and Delilah Ethiopian? And you said that Thomas was from Ethiopia.
Well, he wasn't. He was born in the United States, but for a lot of these early congregations, they claimed the lineage. They called it Abyssinia at that time. They called it Abyssinia, and they used the connectivity to this history to give themselves an instant yichus, to give themselves an instant prehistory, whether they were actually descended from Ethiopians, they'll waste, but the important thing is they claimed that, and they carried themselves with that literacy. So even if they weren't, they still found the elements of creating a shul, which honored the original formation of the synagogues.
Thank you. And Myra, I don't know if Samson and Delilah were Ethiopians. Never heard of that one in my life.
Not Samson, Delilah.
Delilah was a Philistine. Why would she be Ethiopian?
Because she have the dual citizenship? No, it's, I mean, this is, you know, it's a kind of a smorgasbord. People picked and choose. They chose elements of Jewish history. Were their congregations literate enough to know that this is like an ausgetrachte Sache, that it was kind of a made up, handcrafted religion?
I made a mistake. It's not Samson and Delilah. It was David and Bathsheba. David looked down upon an Ethiopian, I thought. Is that right, Rabbi?
I don't know. You're getting closer though.
I can come back and do that performance too.
Henry, I had a thought. You can, with your book, you can say you're the ghost writer,
The ghost, right?
right? Because a ghost is usually white.
Oh, that's it. I was hoping I'd be the guru of LaRue. That's what
That's
it's my new religion. You know, so
Are there
I
any-
hope this. I'm sorry, Red.
Are there any Black publishing companies? Because I wonder if they would take it.
I think the issue of cultural appropriation has taken over. I haven't published a book in like 20 years. I put out a book in 2000 on the history of klezmer music. And since then I've been doing other stuff. I've been doing radio and records and stuff. So I wasn't really aware of trade publishing, but as I have found out, cultural appropriation is a very powerful idea that, if, like I said, if a white guy wants to write about the Black world, in fact, one agent said, just get a Black guy, just, you know, list him as a co-author. It was this cynical, this very kind of cynical, like, really, I said, I can't do that. I mean, it's just, so I don't know. At the moment, I think I will find a way to get this book out. At the moment, I just don't, I don't know what it is, but I want to, let me give everyone my web address to my blog. There is a ton more stuff there for you to look at and to listen to. I have a lot of stuff on this, so please, here, let me just put this out there. Make yourselves at home and subscribe to my blog. And okay, this is to everyone.
And how do people subscribe to your blog?
When you go on to the blog page, there is a subscription
at the bottom.
option.
Okay.
That's correct. So
research-blog.
a lot of stuff still to catch up. Again, this is there's it's a great emerging story. I've so far I have downloaded on the Schwarze Chazonim, I have downloaded over 500 period newspaper articles about the Schwarze Chazonim.
Wow.
This is not like some overnight thing. This was something that was, and even in the Black press, they wrote about it. So you can't ignore this phenomenon, even though no one has ever heard of it. So it's pretty cool.
Well, thank you so much for this. This is quite amazing and informative.